I laid in my empty cell, trying to catch a small nap since I'd been up all night. My mind was racing, though, and made it hard to sleep. I kept rehearsing what I was going to say when Hernandez finally came to get me. They'd emptied my pockets into evidence bags, took my fingerprints, and one cop was heading out to search my car. I wasn't dumb. I knew the evidence would point the police to 3 conclusions. 1, that I'd been in David's home recently. After all, the data on those flash drives had been updated just the day before, even the ones that didn't have the kidnapping transcription on them. 2, the flash drive containing messages between David and his partner might lead them to believe that I kidnapped Katie. And 3, that I'd stolen David's hard drive, as well as confidential medical information. I kept trying to play out the conversation with Hernandez. I hoped that it would pan out the same way that it was running in my head. I was woken up by a slight knock on the bars. My eyes peeked open to see a man in a suit, standing there accompanied by an officer. Hello, sorry to disturb you, he said sheepishly. I'm Terry Jason, your public defender. May we talk? Yeah, of course, I said, sitting up. The officer entered and cuffed me. We were both led to an interrogation room where I'd met Hernandez the first time. I trust you'll shut off the cameras, he said to the officer. The cop nodded, removed my handcuffs, and closed the door. You can call me Terry, he said, reaching out to shake my hand. We sat down opposite each other, with the table between us. I've heard about your case in a brief overview with the chief, he said, pulling folders from his briefcase. It's long, I admitted. So I hear, he said. I'm going to have to apologize in advance. It's likely that you'll have to repeat your story many times during these proceedings. To prevent this as much as possible, you and I are going to sit down and write your version of events down. That way, you can fall back on your statements and ensure that you say the consistent and accurate thing. Does that sound good to you? He said. It made sense, so I nodded. First, I have a contract here for you to sign that says you agree to let me represent you in criminal proceedings. He pushed a paper and pen across the table to me. I skimmed it and signed at the bottom. He pulled it back. Would you like me to call you Xander or Mr. Jones? He asked with an easy smile. Xander's fine, I replied. Okay, Xander, let's start writing. Terry sat patiently with me while I wrote every detail I could think of. I began with my dare conversation with David and followed all the way up to this point. It started out as a page, with scrambled memories and words to jog my memory. Then it slowly formed into a statement that Terry helped me edit into a cohesive, fact-based statement. When you are asked about your memories or events, refer them to this document, he said. We worked for an hour before he spoke again. I have to go to another appointment, but I've asked that you be allowed to continue working in your cell. I've scheduled a meeting with a prosecutor and Detective Hernandez tomorrow at noon. Do you think you can have it complete by then? Yeah, I think so, I said. And I did. I spent the rest of my day writing that statement. I slept sporadically, but I was desperate to complete it before noon the next day. So much had happened, and I had so much to say. I was quite proud of the result. In fact, I was more proud of that statement than this one. That statement had a lot more fresh memories. This one feels a little scatterbrained. My statement was concise and to the point, but maybe it's for the best that this is the one that I posted. The next day at noon, I was back in the interrogation room. Terry sat to my left. Hernandez stood against the wall facing me with his arms crossed. Couldn't read his expression. On the other side of the table sat an older man who was introducing himself as Chief Gunderson, Hernandez's boss. Beside him stood a tall, lanky man with slick-back hair. He held his hands against his back, watching me intently. The tape recorder between us was running. I've been brought up to date on the cases you've been involved in, Chief Gunderson said in a gruff voice. I'm interested to hear everything from your perspective considering the recent developments. You arrested me just to hear my side of the story? I snipped. No. I arrested you because you were suspected of burning down Anne King's house and thereby killing her, Chief Gunderson said. Hernandez told me that you might have felt justified in doing so, considering all the accusations you've levied against Mr. King. So, I'd like to hear what happened from the beginning, and hear your side of events. Who's he? I asked, pointing to the lanky man. "I'm the prosecutor, Adam Lenderson," he answered. "Oh, so you'll be the one trying to put me in prison?" I quipped. Terry put a warning hand on my leg. "I'll be trying to establish the truth about what happened," he corrected, glaring down at me. "My client has prepared a statement that he intends to wholly rely on," Terry said, pushing copies of the 17 handwritten pages across the table. The chief and prosecutor took one. Hernandez stepped forward to grab one too. He instantly started reading from his spot in the corner. I tried to catch his eye, but he didn't look at me. "I trust we can begin the process of discovery today?" Terry asked. "I'll need copies of everything, as well as copies of the official indictment." I turned Terry out and focused on Hernandez. There was something about his demeanor that caught my attention. I couldn't tell what it was. I focused on him for the entire meeting, trying to figure out what my instinct was telling me. They talked over legal details with Terry and corroborated the process of discovery between the two parties. A couple days later, Terry was sitting with me in the interrogation room again, talking through what he'd learned from discovery. A discovery is when two sides of a case share evidence, so there's no surprises when they go to trial. Anything not brought up in discovery is not admissible in court. Before trial, though, would come my arraignment. That's when the formal charges would be laid against me and I would have to plead either guilty or not guilty. Terry was talking through discovery with me, so I would be prepared for what they'd say during the hearing and decide whether I'd plead guilty or not guilty. Here's what I learned. After I'd been arrested, the police had searched my car and found the hard drive, flash drives, and psychiatric evaluation, and something else that was curious. A half-empty gas container. That fucker had planted a gas container in my car at some point without me knowing. See, I'd been in my car all night, so either David knew he was going to burn his house down before I went to Walmart, or he planted it in the few minutes that I was in the police station. I told Terry about the car being planted, and he wrote down some notes. The police had searched through the contents of all the flash drives and discovered the conversation between David and his partner, except, as predicted, they accused me of writing the messages and therefore linked me to a kidnapping. The text files never specified Katie's name, but they claimed Katie's kidnapping was most likely a scenario since I knew about it and therefore was involved. Despite this evidence, however, the prosecution didn't feel like they could convince a jury without more evidence. So Katie's kidnapping wasn't planned to be laid against me as a formal charge, but they were searching for evidence. They had also tried to open the contents of David's hard drive, but found that it was encrypted, just like I did. They'd sent it off to the lab to be analyzed for whatever data could be salvaged. The medical report was classified as inadmissible because it pertained to an individual who did not consent to the dissemination of its contents. As a citizen of the United States, you get some control over who can look at your medical records. Denying its use in a courtroom is a right in certain situations, including this one. David had decided to exercise that right and deny access. As a result, the prosecutor could only charge me with possession of someone else's medical records without permission. That was a serious crime, apparently. Terry had also been informed that the identity theft case was being combined into the charges against me. The credit card companies had done their own investigation and were filing criminal charges against me for fraud. Why would they do that? Because a technical investigation into the origin of the registration of the fraudulent cards found that the reporter himself, Xander Jones, had indeed filled out, completed, and registered forms from his own computing device. In other words, they traced the IP address of who had filled out the registration forms for the card online and found that my computer had been the one to sign up. Which meant they were accusing me of signing up, spending all the money, and then reporting fraud. Also, a major crime. The emptying of my bank account was also pinned on me. Again, they claimed that I was trying to commit fraud by filing a false claim with the bank. The police had finally got the security tapes from the convenience store where the ATM was located. There were all three angles, one camera above the door, one above the register, and one in front of the front counter of the store opposite the ATM. The tape showed a man in a dark hoodie walk into the store. The video was grainy as you would expect, but despite that, a large symbol on the back of the hoodie could be recognized. The man in the hoodie walked to the ATM and pulled something from their pocket. The prosecution claimed that it was a cell phone since the timestamp on the camera matched the timestamp of the logo into my bank account. The hooded figure looked down at it for a few moments before typing into the ATM, blocking the screen with their body. The money spat out, he grabbed it, and walked towards the door. The camera on the opposite corner of the ATM was the one able to catch a glimpse of their face. It was grainy, but the prosecution compared it to the pictures of my Facebook profile to claim that it had been just enough resemblance to have been me. Comparing to David's pictures, it could have been him too. I'd argued that point with the prosecutor pretty fiercely. When I was done with my outburst, the prosecutor told me that the investigators had also found a hoodie with the same logo in my apartment. Then they played their trump card. The bank had been logged into from the IP address assigned to my own cell phone during that time period. Regarding the fire, which was the main accusation against me, they had decent evidence. The gas can was one, the voicemail was another, but there was even stronger evidence. When I first arrived at Walmart, I parked near the front doors in view of cameras hanging off the buildings. They clearly saw me drive away when I was heading to David's house. When I came back, though, I had parked in the back of the lot, intending to be away from other cars while I slept. The cameras could barely make out the car parking in the back lot. It was too dark to tell if it was even a vehicle, the prosecutor claimed. So realistically, I only had my own testimony to support the fact that I got back to Walmart at around 6 p.m. I should add that it took about 15 minutes to get to David's house from Walmart, just so you can understand the time frame. Fire crews had received a call at 6:04 p.m. that David's house was on fire. They had raced over immediately and found the house burning brightly. David had been found trying to lift his mother up from the ground in her bedroom. They had brought them both out, and it was discovered that Mrs. K was already dead from suffocation. David had been rushed to the hospital with a few minor burns and some smoke inhalation. He had yet to explain his version of events to the police. The firefighters had filled out a report stating that the fire had been started from the middle of the living room, where a puddle of gasoline had ignited. The flames spread throughout the house, traces of gasoline were found in various rooms, making them believe that suspects, or me, went from room to room and splashed gasoline around, just like in the movies. They also concluded that the fire had been started sometime before it was called in, because of how much damage had already occurred by the time they arrived. I now know that David had set an alarm on his phone that was linked to the app that he installed on my phone. When my GPS read that I was at his house, an alert would be sent to his phone as a text message. I could only guess that he'd jumped in his car, left work, and sped all the way home. That's why I think the time was so close. I'm telling you all the details so you can see just how hopeless I felt when I sat in jail. I was there for 2 whole weeks, where it was the same accusations and evidence over and over again. I really started to just give up. During the first few days, I asked Terry about how we could prove that it was David, specifically, who had committed these crimes. He frowned and told me that I should be more concerned about being proven innocent, period, not just pinning it on another man. By the end of the 2 weeks, I was ready to just plead guilty rather than fight. The arrangement went poorly. No charges were thrown out that had been placed against me. I would list all the crimes I was being charged with, but I don't remember their exact phrases, and I know I'll be getting it wrong. You get the general idea, though, that I was fucked. Bail had been set at $5,000, which essentially guaranteed that I'd be stuck in jail for a while. I had already contacted my parents out of desperation, and they would try to raise money from family members and friends, but couldn't pay immediately. After 3 weeks, I was very depressed and not eating much. Terry tried to cheer me up by showing me parts of arguments that he was preparing for, but nothing could cheer me. I thought about Katie a lot, and Clark and Ivan, and I missed my parents. I also missed Clark's first hearing in the graffiti case, so I had no idea how that was going, which made me feel guilty that I couldn't support him. During the time I was in jail, Hernandez only came to visit me once. It was during the 3rd week I jumped off my bed and ran to the bars. "Hernandez!" I said, "Please tell me that you've come with some good news." "No," he said. "You're being transferred to the county jail. Your trial will be happening there." "Why?" He shrugged. "Just how it works." "Did you find anything on Isaac?" I said. I've been clinging to the hope that Isaac's body would turn up evidence against David. I was wanting to nail him for that one crime, just one. I wanted it so bad that my hands would shake when I thought about it. "I'm not allowed to talk about that," he said, avoiding my eyes. "Anyway, I came to tell you that you'll be moved in 3 days." "Hernandez," I said as he turned to leave, "I thought you believed me." "I do," he said. "Until you burned David's house down. Now I'm not so sure who the psychopath really is." "I didn't do it!" I shouted. But he walked away. 3 days later, as Hernandez had said, they came to move me. After dinner, I was cuffed and led out the door to a police cruiser that would drive me up to the county jail 2 hours away. The 2 officers who drove were polite to me, but instantly cranked up the radio when we got on the road. I could barely hear myself think. I was starting to get frustrated. I'd always hated car trips without my own music. Now I was stuck in a 2-hour car ride with my hands cuffed behind my back and radio blasting music I didn't like. But about an hour in, and I was ready to scream, I stared out the window trying to find something interesting to watch and focus my mind on. We were on a 2-lane highway with no other cars in sight. It's getting late. So looking back, I figured people were home for the night, and that's why it was so dead. My view of the nice lake was suddenly obscured by a big, gray truck. Trying to find something else to look at, but noticed it was getting dangerously close to our lane. I looked up at it and saw that it was an armored truck. And it had the same logo as the company David worked for. The panic was instantaneous. Something gripped my lungs and kept me from vocalizing. The truck slowly neared the side of the police cruiser before pressing against it. The cop shouted. The cop who was driving slammed on his brakes, and the other cop dropped the radio that he was reaching for. The cruiser didn't slow down fast enough, however, and the truck nudged it off the road. I braced for impact as we rolled down the grassy slope and slammed into a tree. My seatbelt had held me in place, but my head ached when it rammed against the driver's headrest. The 2 cops were unconscious, lying at awkward angles. Neither of them had their seatbelts. I started yanking at the handcuffs, trying to reach my seatbelt to undo it. I reached the red button and pressed it, and when I turned back around to wiggle out of the loose seatbelt, I saw David fucking King walking down the slope towards the car. Shit, fuck. I cursed, trying to reach for the door handle with my cupped hands. No such luck. The doors were locked from the outside to prevent prisoners from opening the doors on their own. David got closer and closer until he was right outside the car. He shot a smirk at me and opened my door. I tried to back away, but he grabbed my arm and tossed me out of the car. I fell to the dirt with a gasp. I sat up a little and saw that he had turned his attention back to the police car. I saw one of the cops beginning to stir. David opened the door and pulled something from his pocket. With a quick motion, he stabbed the cop in the neck. Blood splurted out, and the cop started screaming and gurgling, grabbing for his neck. I think I screamed too, but I couldn't remember. He closed the door and walked around to the other side. I could see the other cop was moving, but I couldn't tell what he was doing. Apparently, he was reaching for his radio because David yanked it out of his hand and set it on the car's roof. And he stabbed that cop too. "Don't get up," he threatened, walking towards me. I didn't bother trying. He walked over to where I sat and went behind me. I tried to face him, but he kicked me lightly. He knelt down and I felt him scratching the metal on my handcuffs. I was confused, but sat absolutely still. "Nice to see you again, Xander," he said, walking to stand in front of me. I watched him with true fear. His entire demeanor was different from the night that we had graffitied his house. He was changed. When I didn't answer, he laughed and he twisted the small object in his gloved hands. I noticed through the blood that it was a crudely crafted shiv about the length and width of a finger. "Told you. I'm not gonna kill you, Xander. In fact, for once, I'm here to help you out. Well, sort of." "What does that mean?" I asked shakily. "Remember the night you graffitied my house?" I nodded. "I told you I'd consider giving you advice on how to succeed in our game. Well, the time has come. I'm going to give you more than advice. You see, you're no fun in jail. I've seen the evidence that they have on you. You're going away for a long time. I don't want that. So, I'm granting you a second chance to keep playing." He walked behind me again, and I felt sticky blood on my fingers and hand as he pressed the small shiv against my hand. "Now, here's how this works," he said, standing back in front of me. "I'm going to leave this knife with you, your fingerprints on it in the car, and they'll think you stabbed the cops and made a run for it. I'm going to remove your handcuffs and let you make a run for it. You'll have a 30-minute head start before I call in on the radio." "Oh God, he's got a knife. He stabbed the driver and he..." David cut off, mimicking the call that he'd make. Goosebumps ran up my spine. "I'll be sitting here and waiting. If you attempt to come back, I'll just take you away in my car and we'll play a different game. Do you understand?" I nodded, too terrified to speak. "Get up," he commanded. I struggled to my feet, rolling in the dirt to get to my knees and stand. "Come here," he said, moving towards the cop car. I followed. He opened the police car door and put his hand against the officer's neck. I flinched when he flicked blood at me. It spattered across my jail suit and face. I almost threw up. "There you go," he purred. He motioned for me to turn around, and I did. He pulled the handcuff keys off the dead cop and unlocked the cuffs. I rubbed my wrists. They were sore and marked from the car crash. I considered trying to get the shiv back from him and attack, but the idea of going with him in his car to play other games terrified me. David had set a backpack next to the car, and now set it in my hands. "Hernandez says hello," he said with a malicious grin. "I paid him a lot of money to get him to let me track this car. He demanded that I give you half, of course. I'm not that generous, so here's $2,000. Change of clothes, new shoes, and a map. Nearest town is 10 miles west. Better hurry. Remember, in 30 minutes, I'm calling it in." My jaw shook as I put the backpack on and started heading towards the setting sun. The forest looked dark and menacing. I looked back when I was partway through the trees, and there he was. He leaned against the car, drinking from the coffee container one of the cops had brought with. Shuddering, in shock, and absolutely terrified. I walked into the woods.